The wind whispered through the bones of the old trees, carrying with it the scent of ash and memory. Beneath the roots of the great tree, the earth still trembled from promises once made and never kept. Mama Inki's voice rose through the dark, steady as breath in winter. A debt unpaid always comes home, not in coin, not in mercy, but in blood, in flesh, in soul. Long ago, before the fires touched Uka, before the serpent stirred beneath the soil, a vow was made in secret. A promise wrapped in silence, handed down from elder to elder like a wound no one dared to name. They thought time would bury it. They thought silence could drown it. They believed the shadow would lose its way. But shadows never forget. And blood remembers. Every lie, every betrayal, every broken oath whispered under the moon. The land does not forget, and neither do the gods who sleep beneath it. Now, as the final thread tightens and the gate stirs once more, Uka must answer for what it once dared to ignore. Because some debts are written in blood, and blood always finds its way home. The wind whispered through the charred remains of the forest, bending the ash-coated trees into crooked shadows. Moonlight barely pierced the thick mist as Adanna stood facing Chima, her hand trembling around the obsidian ceremonial dagger. His chest rose and fell with painful effort. Black veins snaked beneath his dark, sweat-slick skin, pulsing with corruption. His eyes, half human, half something else, glowed faintly red, but behind them lingered a flicker of clarity. Of him. "Do it," he said, voice rough and low. "End it, before I'm no longer me." Adanna's lips quivered. Tears streaked dark lines down her soot-covered cheeks. The dagger in her hand shook, not from fear of him, but from the weight of the choice. "No, there's another way. I will not lose you, Chima." Behind her, the ancient hut creaked. From its shadows, Mama Inki emerged like a spirit from beyond. Her long silver braids fluttered in the wind. Her staff tapped once on the dry earth, a sound that echoed through the trees like a final judgment. "There is no salvation, child," she said softly. "Only a choice." Adanna turned to face her, the dagger now lowered but still gripped tight. "Then I choose," she whispered. "We don't kill him. We bind her. And him." Mama Inki's one good eye narrowed, her face unreadable. "So be it." She looked up at the sky as if speaking to something far older than the stars. Then the binding of the red thread begins. Beneath the great tree, its roots thick as arms, gnarled from centuries of watching, Adanna and Chima knelt. Their wrists were tied together by a long red cord soaked in fresh goat's blood. The cord pulsed faintly, almost alive. All around them, runes carved into the ground shimmered, etched in blood, ash, and crushed bone. A sacred circle, a prison for gods. Mama Inki stood above them, the bone needle in her hand gleaming under the moonlight. With slow precision, she etched ancient sigils into their skin, marks of sacrifice and soul binding, older than the oldest names spoken by men. Chima winced as the needle bit into his flesh. Adanna did not flinch. "Speak your vow," Mama Inki commanded, her voice firm as stone. Adanna looked into Chima's eyes and spoke, her voice unwavering. "My life for his, my soul for his freedom, my name for his return." Chima's voice was hoarse, but filled with love and pain. "My life for hers, even in death, I choose her." The red cord shimmered, The sigils on the earth glowed like coals in a dying fire. But then, they faded. The power faltered. "Something is missing," Mama Inki said, her brow furrowed. "A gate cannot close unless a soul gives itself freely." She looked at the two of them, young, broken, trying so desperately to save each other. Then she smiled, a soft, sad smile. "I've lived enough lifetimes," she said. "This world has taken more than it gave." Without pause, Mama Inki raised the dagger to her chest. Adanna screamed, "No!" But it was too late. "I give it myself," Mama Inki said, and plunged the blade into her heart. Blood, thick, dark, ancient, spilled from her chest and soaked into the roots of the great tree. The earth groaned. The cord between Adanna and Chima tightened, searing into their skin until it vanished completely, leaving behind only a glowing mark that pulsed like a heartbeat. Mama Inki collapsed. Her body went still, but the air shimmered. A faint glowing form rose from her fallen body, a spirit of smoke and light. A whisper reached Adanna's ears. "Finish it." The village square reeked of blood. Torches burned low, their flames flickering against the walls of huts soaked in red. Bodies lay scattered like broken dolls. Warriors, hunters, elders, all loyal to Emeka. Their throats were carved in ritual shapes, not for battle, but for offering. In the center stood Emeka, bare-chested and bathed in gore. His once human skin was cracked, split open along his spine and shoulders to reveal a sheen of dark scales underneath. The ground trembled beneath him, and black smoke hissed from the earth around his feet like steam from the mouth of the underworld. From the trees, Adanna and Chima emerged, shadows in motion, fury in their steps. Chima's voice was no longer his own. It rumbled, distorted by what was festering inside him. "What have you done?" Emeka turned, smiling, his teeth far too sharp, his eyes two pools of endless black. He held up his blood-stained hands like a victorious priest. "What you could not. I embraced her. I gave her what she wanted." He extended his arms. Smoke curled up his limbs like serpents. His body convulsed, and the air pulsed with ancient forbidden power. "I am the dark priest now, and the gate will open." Adanna stepped forward, raising her silver serpent flute. Chima let out a growl, claws growing from his hands, breath steaming with dark fire. But Emeka didn't hesitate. He lifted his hand and spoke a word not meant for mortal tongues. The air cracked. A shockwave of power surged through the ground, knocking them back. "You are too late. She is already awake." The battle began beneath the roots of the great tree, the same place where blood had just sealed the binding. The gate, a circular formation carved into the ground beneath the tree, pulsed with crimson light. From its center, a low chant echoed, though no lips moved. It was Eze-Nwanyi, calling through realms. "Let me in. Let me through." Emeka struck first. Dark tendrils burst from his back and lashed toward Chima. Chima dodged, barely, his speed inhuman, his movements wild. The two clashed with a force that shook the tree's roots. Each blow sent ripples of power through the earth. Emeka fought like a god possessed, swift, cruel, relentless. Chima fought like a man trying not to become a monster. On the edge of the circle, Adanna played the flute, her fingers trembling, her breath steady. The melody was the one Mama Inki had taught her in secret, a song meant to hold back darkness. With each note, the gate flickered, resisting. "You can't stop me!" Emeka roared. "I hold the key!" He raised both hands. The sigils around the gate lit up. The roots began to twist unnaturally, forming a spiral staircase into the void beneath. Adanna's song faltered. Chima screamed, clawing at his own face as the corruption inside him surged. Eze-Nwanyi whispered again, softer now, almost sweet. Just one more soul. Let me in. The ground was scorched. Smoke clung to the air like a curse refusing to lift. The roots of the great tree twisted upward now, reaching into the sky like the arms of the condemned. Blood stained the soil. The gate beneath them pulsed in rhythm with a heartbeat not of this world. Chima collapsed to his knees, his claws digging into the earth. His skin crawled, changing, patches of black scales spreading across his chest, his shoulders, his arms. The spiral scar on his chest now glowed red, a cursed emblem awakening. His breaths came in harsh snarls. I'm losing it. She's crawling inside. I can feel her. Adanna rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. His red eyes flickered. Still his. For now. You are still you, Chima. Still mine. Still real. He tried to speak, but a growl escaped instead. He gripped her arms, not in attack, but to steady himself, to hold on to the last piece of who he was. I can't hold it. Not much longer. Please, end it. Before I hurt you. Before I become her. Adanna's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head violently. No, I won't. I won't let this be how it ends. But then she felt it. The dagger, already in her hand. As if fate had placed it there without her noticing. Her grip tightened. Chima looked into her soul, and he smiled. Thank you, Chima whispered, for seeing me, even when I stopped seeing myself. The dagger shook in Adanna's hand. She screamed, not from rage, but from love torn in half. Then she drove the blade deep into his chest. The sound was not a scream. It was a silence that rang louder than thunder. Chima's body convulsed once, then again. His mouth opened in a gasp as black blood poured out. Thick, unnatural, alive. It sizzled as it hit the earth. From the wound, tiny black snakes emerged. Hundreds of them, hissing, writhing, slithering into the soil. Each one carried a fragment of Eze-Nwanyi's corruption, now dispersed, but not destroyed. Adanna held him in her arms as his breathing slowed. His fingers brushed her cheek. Adanna, she's in you now. His hand fell, and Chima was gone. But his words remained, echoing in her bones, and something inside her shifted. Silence settled over the great tree like a burial shroud. The ground no longer pulsed, the gate no longer glowed, but something breathed. Adanna knelt alone in the blood-soaked soil, her arms still wrapped around Chima's lifeless body. Her hair clung to her cheeks, matted with sweat and ash. Her eyes were wide, empty, but beneath the stillness, something deep inside moved. The wind shifted. A low hum echoed from the earth, like a drumbeat beneath her skin. Her fingers twitched. And then, she stood. But it was not the same girl who had knelt. Her spine straightened unnaturally, as if pulled by invisible strings. Her eyes darkened to obsidian. Her lips parted in a whisper, though no sound came. Her skin, once warm and rich with life, now shimmered faintly with a pale, unearthly glow. The trees bent back, animals scattered, and from the nearby village, screams rose. Villagers stared in horror as Adanna stepped into the clearing. Her red cloak whipped around her like fire, but she did not burn. Some fell to their knees, some fled. From the shadows, Emeka watched and smiled. She's awake, just as the prophecy said. He stepped forward, lifting his hand in a gesture of control, of possession. Kneel, priestess, your throne awaits. But Adanna turned, and her eyes, those endless, devouring eyes, locked onto him. With a single word, one not meant for human tongues, she stripped him of his flesh. Emeka screamed, his skin peeling away like paper in flame, revealing blood, then bone, then nothing, and then silence. But Adanna did not stop. She turned toward Uka and began to walk. With each step, the earth cracked beneath her bare feet. Flowers wilted, water blackened. Flames rose not from torches, but from air itself, summoned by her rage and pain and power. She did not speak. She did not cry. The village, her village, burned. Children hid. Elders wept. No one dared call her name. Eze-Nwanyi had returned, not through the gate, through her. From within, Adanna could feel it, the snake coiling around her spine, whispering in a voice made of temptation and truth. You've always been mine. You were born for this, chosen for this, the last daughter, the final vessel. But deeper still, in the corner of her soul where the flute's melody once lived, Adanna clawed back, fought back. She was still there, beneath the goddess, beneath the curse. Adanna still lived. And then, faintly, through the smoke and fire, another voice reached her, gentle, loving, familiar. Come. The fires of Uka crackled in the distance, casting eerie shadows across the ruins. Adanna stood alone at the edge of the destruction, her body motionless, her eyes glowing faintly. Within her, Eze-Nwanyi coiled, whispering promises of dominion, of power without end. But just as her body prepared to take another step toward the total undoing of her people, a light appeared. Not a flame, not magic, but a soft glow. Warm, gentle, familiar. From the mist, Mama Inki's spirit emerged, translucent, wrapped in the same raffia robes she'd worn in life, staff still in hand though she no longer walked. Adanna froze. The serpent inside her hissed. The light burned it. Mama Inki reached out her hand, not as a seer, not as a teacher, but as a mother. Come, my child, to the soul well. Adanna's lips parted. Her legs trembled, and slowly, as if walking through water, she followed. The land around them shifted. The smoke faded. The forest bent, and the path to the ancient soul well revealed itself. It was carved from bone and obsidian, spiraled in the earth like a sleeping creature's eye. Symbols etched in forgotten tongues glowed faintly across its rim. From within came a pulsing silence, deeper than darkness, older than time. Adanna stepped to its edge. Mama Inki's voice was soft, but firm. Inside lies the last ritual, the true gate, the final thread. You know what must be given. Adanna looked down into the well. She saw memories, her childhood, her laughter, her brother's songs, Chima's smile, the silver flute in her hand, and she saw what lay beneath, the seed of Eze-Nwanyi, pulsing, coiled, waiting. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "If I do this, there will be nothing left of me." Mama Inki nodded. That is the price, for peace, for love, for Uka. Adanna turned toward her one last time. Will they remember me? Mama Inki smiled, tears in her spectral eyes. They won't need to. Peace will be your legacy. Adanna turned back. She dropped the flute into the well. She pulled the obsidian dagger from her belt. And with a final breath, she whispered, "For Uka, for Chima, for all who came before me." She leapt. Flames erupted. Eze-Nwanyi screamed, not in rage, but in agony, in disbelief, in death. The sky split with red lightning. The earth shook. The serpent's spirit thrashed, burning as Adanna's soul tore through it from within, unraveling her thread by thread, until there was only silence. The earth was still. No screams, no wind, no voices in the shadows. The village of Uka, once cursed, once haunted, stood reborn in quiet ruins. Charred huts had been rebuilt with trembling hands. New fires crackled in hearths, not as weapons, but as warmth. The great tree still stood, but its roots no longer pulsed with crimson. The gate beneath had vanished, swallowed by the soil, never to open again. The people worked, prayed, sang, but no one spoke her name. Not Adanna, not Eze-Nwanyi, not even Chima. They dared not. Some said forgetting was peace. Others knew better, because forgetting does not mean forgiving, and peace never comes without a price. Mama Inki was gone, her staff buried beneath the altar, her hut left untouched, and in the hearts of the villagers, a hollow space remained, where a girl once stood. Years passed. One morning, a child, barefoot, curious, innocent, wandered down to the river that once ran red. He was looking for fish. Instead, he found something else. Near the water's edge, tangled in reeds, a small, glimmering scale, black as midnight, with golden edges that shimmered in the light. He picked it up, turning it over in his tiny hand. It was warm. And then he heard it. A whisper, soft, slithering, familiar and ancient. She's sleeping now, but not gone. The child smiled, tucked the scale into his pouch, and walked away. The flames died long ago. The names were forgotten, the songs unsung, and yet the earth still remembers. No one speaks her name in Uka, not out of fear, but out of reverence, because silence is the only offering left for a soul that gave everything. The great tree stands quiet now, its roots sleep, its gate closed, for now. But deep beneath, where light has never reached, where the blood once burned and the serpent once dreamed, a whisper coils. A child walks beside the river, a scale in his hand, and something ancient stirs. She's sleeping now, but not gone. They thought it was just a legend, until the first death, and then another.